Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're a couple minutes late. Sorry about that. Um, my name's Mindy Dokis. I am the host right now, or like for the meeting. I'm so awkward. Sorry. Welcome to the Disability and Healthy Relationships Echo today. So grateful you're all joining us. Um, we are gonna jump in, but before I start, I wanted to just invite you to put into the chat your name, your organization, your position. Tell us just a little bit about you, where you're coming, where you're joining from today, like what state you're coming from. Because we want to know all of that about you. But thank you so much for being here. Um, okay. So we are recording. I don't know if you heard that when I started, but we are going to record. So just keep that in mind by being here. You're showing us that you are okay with that. We love to record these because not everyone can join live. And we know that there's a lot of people who want to come and learn and share with us. So thank you for sticking around with us. And I have too much stuff on my screen. Let me find there we go. Okay. Also, if you are new to an Echo, Echo is an interactive community. We have presenters, stakeholders, and community members all coming together to learn together. And part of that learning together is participating in the meetings. So we are going to start with our presenters of the day that have, a presentation prepared. But then after their presentation, we'll have some like discussion time. And we would love it if you could please stick around and join us for that. We want to learn from each other, from our different strengths and different backgrounds that we all have. Also, during the training, if you want to share any questions that you might have in the chat or any comments, anything like that, just put those in the chat. We'd ask you to stay muted during the presentation. But then at the end, if you want to jump into the discussion that we'll have at the end, then we would love to hear from everybody. Also, just keeping in mind as we're chatting here, I know that some of us might share actual experiences that you've had, either professional or personal. Just keep in mind that we are recording this and it's going to be shared online. And we have a lot of people from a lot of places. So just protect individual privacy as you're sharing those experiences. Okay, and like I said, we'll start with our speaker, and then we'll have some community questions and time to discuss as a group later on during the session. But the biggest takeaway is that we're a community of practice. We want everyone to share their knowledge. So please feel free to comment or share your questions in the chat as we're going. And then, like I said, at the end, we would love to hear from everyone on the call. If you have like specific questions or case studies that you would like to share in future presentations, we would love to hear from you. So there's my email right there. If you have something you would like to talk about with the group or share, please reach out to me. This is an optional thing, but if you would like, sorry, I have a kid here with me. If you want to, you can change your profile name to reflect also who you are, where you're coming from, what organization you're with, just to make it a little bit easier for everyone to know who's here. But also, if you've shared that in the chat, that is great. You're welcome to raise your hand if you have something that you would like to discuss. But like I said, I'll be watching the chat, and so you can put questions in the chat as well. Okay, so today's topic, we're excited to hear from Alexandria and Raven from the Utah Parent Center. Alexandria Acor serves as a community educator and relationship consultant at the Utah Parent Center, bringing a year of dedicated experience to the Tetons Healthy Relationships and Sexual Wellness Program. In her role, she plans, implements, and expands this vital program for teens and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD. Committed to self-determination and neuro-affirming practices, Alexandria played a key role in developing the Tetons curriculum that fosters dignity and inclusivity. We're excited to have her here. And then we also have Raven presenting with us. Raven is an intern with the Utah Parent Center working on research and sex education through Tetons. Raven holds a master's degree in psychology and is currently pursuing her PhD with her research focus on the intersections of sexual identity, behavior, communication, and education. So we're excited to get started. Thank you so much.
Yep. I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen.
Okay. Oh, yes. I think I still need to give you that access. Sorry. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, cool.
And Raven just got here.
Oh, great. Okay, well then maybe they're
Oh,
ready to share their screen.
yeah.
Will you give Raven the ability? And I will just
Yes.
wait my turn.
Should be good to go.
Okay.
Let's see.
Hi, I'm so sorry.
Great.
Hi,
Okay.
Raven. We're glad to have you here.
Likewise, trust the wait is going to be worth it. This presentation is going to be spectacular.
Looking forward to it. Do you have access to share your screen, Raven?
Yeah.
Please let me know if you don't, but you should.
Yes, I do.
Okay, okay, great.
Cool. I will share my screen and get it up right now. Okay. Okay. Cool. Can everybody see the PowerPoint slide? Yeah,
You got
cool.
it.
Awesome. Okay. Do you want me to just jump right into it?
You're good to go. Yep. Thank you so
Cool.
much.
Awesome. Thank you for your patience. And everyone else in this call. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Raven. We're going to give brief introductions and then we're going to dive right into this fantastic topic of ableism and sexuality presented by Tetons. So first things first, Ali, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Mindy did a really great job reading my bio, so I'll just say hello. I work with the Utah Parent Center on the Tetons project. My name's Allie. I am a self-advocate myself. My son also a self-advocate, and what we're talking about today, I'm super passionate about, and I just really appreciate everybody's interest and being here with us today.
Thanks for sharing. I'm assuming I was introduced as well. I'm an intern helping with Tetons. I'm also a PhD student studying sexuality in general. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. So not to waste any more time, we can dive right into it. So we're going to go into what is ableism, why is ableism important to know, what is bias, and then lastly, end it with disability and sexuality. So first things first, what is ableism? So ableism is a set of beliefs, practices that discriminate against people with disabilities. So there are a lot of assumptions made under ableism. So for instance, there's an assumption that people with disabilities should be fixed or cured. Those with disabilities or those without disabilities are inherently better than individuals with disabilities. Individuals with disabilities are not worth living. And not having a disability is something that's normative and normal and optimal. So it's important to know that anyone can have ableist belief, including those with disabilities and those without. So it's important that we know how these assumptions show up and how we can challenge them within our own practices and interactions. So this is what we're going to be going throughout this presentation of how we can challenge them, how do we become aware of these, and how do we move forward. So what does ableism actually look like? So ableism is pervasive and shows up in every aspect of one's life, from interpersonal interactions to organizational policies. Ableism can specifically show up in a variety of ways. For instance, mental age theory, or in other words, treating people with disabilities as if they're younger than they actually are, instead of talking to them. For instance, if you're talking to an adult, you should be talking to them like they're an adult and not like they're an infant. And then we have benevolent ableism. Benevolent ableism is making excuses for harm caused by a person with disability because you have low expectations for them. So not holding them up to the same standard if they've enacted harm just because they may have a disability. Paternalism, or people with disabilities should not have the same autonomy as people without because they need support. So that can show up in ways like, for instance, instead of talking with the self-advocate, you may talk to their caregiver and not even include the self-advocate in these conversations. Pretending that people with disabilities do not exist at all is a form of ableism. And lastly, believing people with disabilities are pretending to receive certain benefits. Like they don't actually have a disability, that they're just pretending to have this disability so they get, a special thing, a coupon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which we all know is not true. So I'm going to go into a little scenario about how this may show up. So scenario one, we have this woman, her name is Cindy. Cindy was driving around a parking lot in desperate search of a parking spot, which I know we probably all have done, especially, Costco, huge parking lot with you never could find a parking space. And she sees a handicap parking spot in the next row over. She does her best to drive over to get to it, but just before she gets to it, someone else pulls up and takes it before her. Maybe a frustrating experience we've experienced. And then frustrated, she decides to wait for the person to get out of the car to see if they truly are disabled, indicating that she may be able to spot their disability just by looking at them. This is an example of ableism since someone assumes they can get someone's spot, or they can spot someone's ability and make a judgment on if they are disabled enough to deserve the support. So maybe she was looking for a wheelchair, maybe she was looking for a cane, maybe she's looking for these very visual forms of disability, which oftentimes are not true. So what can Cindy do instead? Assume someone has a disability and move on and find a different parking spot. Hopefully there will be another handicap parking spot available to her. If not, she may just have to find another one or wait until this person gets back. So we have another scenario about what ableism looks like. In this scenario, Doug is age 21 and is interested in having sex with his long-term girlfriend of 2 years. However, he's extremely nervous on how to bring up the subject with his partner, and he decides to talk to his therapist that he's been seeing regularly about this decision. It's a big deal. He trusts his therapist. He's been talking with his therapist for a long time. So yeah, this is something he'll bring up with his therapist. Instead of providing guidance to Doug, his therapist asks if he's already spoke with his caregivers about this decision. Reminder, Doug is 21. So the therapist insisted he speak to his caregivers about his decision first and believed he may not even be ready to have sex. His therapist then changes the subject in order to avoid discussing this topic any further. So, hey, you want to have sex? Great, talk with your caregiver. We're not going to talk about this anymore. Let's change the subject. This is an example of ableism because the therapist did not honor Doug's autonomy and right to choose. Instead, he referred to the caregiver to make that decision instead for him. Additionally, the therapist implied that he may not be ready or may not be old enough to have sex when Doug is 21 and is of the age to have sex. So what can his therapist do instead in this situation? Well, honor Doug's autonomy and provide guidance on how to bring up this topic to his girlfriend. Clearly, he has some distress, and although this therapist may not be trained to be a sex therapist, the therapist can provide some helpful guidance on how to navigate these decisions. If the therapist felt uncomfortable, you can always refer to a professional organization for more help, or even provide a resource that Doug can go and look into on his own time. If you may, sex is an uncomfortable topic, so you can still provide the information without going too deep and honoring Doug's autonomy. So another thing to take into consideration within ableism is intersectionality. So intersectionality is a framework coined by the brilliant Kimberly Crenshaw to describe the unique experiences of Black women. This has then been applied to a lot of marginalized identities and cross identities, but it is to understand the mutual and often intersecting social identities such as race, age, gender, class, and how that interacts with systems of power to create unique forms of discrimination and privilege. It is important to understand that intersectionality is not just adding one minoritized or marginalized identity plus another minoritized and marginalized identity. It's about how these have compound and unique effects. So perhaps a Black disabled woman will have different experiences than maybe a white disabled or white woman with disabilities. So using this approach, using this approach allows you to understand how ableism interacts with various aspects of your client's identity that will shape these unique experiences. So I have a example provided here. So this is scenario 3. So in this scenario, a Black woman with autism goes to the doctor experiencing extreme pain in her stomach, and she goes to seek treatment, as anyone would if you have extreme pain in your stomach. Her doctor asks basic questions about why she was in, how much pain she's experiencing, and after about 5-minute conversation, doctor says she should be fine and suggests that she should take some medicine to calm her stomach, such as, Tums at home. She's not going to prescribe anything. She's not going to do any further tests. She's like, you have some pain, just take something at home. After following the doctor's suggestions and not experiencing any relief, she goes back to the doctor and insists some tests are ran. After taking the exams, the doctor finds that she actually had an ulcer and not just a random stomach ache. So some aspects of ableism and intersectionality to keep in mind here are: 1, Black individuals are often believed to feel pain differently than white individuals, although this is not true. Women are often rated as being overly sensitive, and their pain is often not taken seriously because they're just being sensitive. And then those with autism or neurodivergence often are not taken seriously by healthcare professionals due to their perceived ability or lack thereof. In tandem, these work together to create a unique experience for this patient. So next we have ableism and trauma. We're going to just go briefly into this and how this interacts. So brief definition: trauma is any disturbing experience that results in this significant fear, helplessness, disassociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitude, behavior, or other aspects of functioning. So experiencing ableism is traumatic. And then you add this with other marginalized effects that we've seen with intersectionality, such as race, sexuality, gender, etc. It creates more things of trauma. So it can be a result of the inaccessible environments individuals in, poor attitudes, biased assumptions about people with disabilities, all of which can lead to chronic exposure to distressing and often confusing circumstances. In addition, according to the minority stress model, minorities often experience chronic stress due to prolonged exposure to stigma and discrimination. This stigma and discrimination can show up in a lot of diverse ways, such as microaggressions or gaslighting, even saying, yeah, you may not even have that disability, or, oh, you can do it, you can't do it even. It can be forms of gaslighting. These stigma-related stressors can then trigger many mental health struggles throughout the lifetime, such as rumination or overthinking, feelings of isolation, and even negative self-beliefs. In addition, misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis can also be traumatic because you can't get the form of treatment or help or support that you may need. It is important to consider that 1 in 4 adults with autism and 1 in 3 women with autism have reported at least one misdiagnosis. So we could even touch on intersectionality here. Women with autism have experienced more rates of misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis than men with autism. And there's a long history with that. One being that a lot of DSM criteria is based on males. And so if you're using that as your diagnosis, you may not get diagnosing women correctly. Misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis have various consequences on mental health, such as negative self-perception, chronic stress, lack of understanding, depression, and anxiety. It is also important to note, oh, I've already said that, and then also this trauma then leads to long-term health outcomes. What outcomes, you may ask? So you have quote unquote mental health problems. So this can show up as emotional dysregulation when you're triggered, poor worsening self-concept, chronic stress, difficulty connecting with the community. So if you are experiencing ableism, if you're experiencing trauma within this identity, you may not feel the need or strength to connect with the community. And then it could also show up as physical symptoms such as chronic pain, substance use, cardiac issues, stomach issues, and even headaches. So with that, trauma-informed approach is always important. I'll go through this briefly. Trauma-informed means understanding how trauma affects the body and self, understanding the signs and symptoms of trauma, integrating knowledge and trauma into your practice, policies, and procedures, and importantly, avoid re-traumatizing your patient or client. So a couple things to keep in mind. There are 6 principles of trauma-informed care. So if you are working with someone who has trauma, either due to their disability or due to something else, it is important to keep this in mind that one, you must ensure that the client is feeling safe in both physical setting as well as interpersonal interaction. So making sure the environment is comfortable as well as making sure that what you're saying is safe and comfortable as well and not re-traumatizing individuals. Make sure you have trustworthy and transparency. So procedures and practice are done in a way in which decisions are made transparent and consistent. Also, these operations must be respectful and fair to maintain this trust. And then peer support others who have a history of trauma or family members. It's always important if you have some peers to get involved. That's why getting into community is very important. Collaboration, leveling power differences between staff and client to work in collaboration. Knowing how your privilege shows up and how much power you have when dealing with clients, because if you are in a position of power, you should be aware of that and how that might impact the dynamics you have with your client is very important. Empowerment is the 5th. Recognizing and building upon an individual's strength and lived experiences, not just bringing your own expertise, but also bringing in their expertise and their own lived experience through that. And lastly, having humility and responsiveness, moving past cultural stereotypes and biases that cause historical trauma. So moving past those biases, moving past those harmful rhetoric. So how does trauma and disability shape? So the scars of disability are often invisible, going back, that we can't always see disability. 17.2% of children with a disability have already reported being a victim or seeing violence versus 5.3% of children without a disability. 18.6% of children with a disability have experienced 2 or more types of stressful events. And these stressful events can range from living with someone with a drug or alcohol problem, experiencing parental or guardian incarceration, living or being exposed to violence. And then language and communication barriers compound these experiences of abuse, making it harder to interrupt, stop, and even report abuse. The symptoms of abuse may be present themselves as other issues such as behavior management problems. So if you have a client who may have these behavior management problems, it may be a symptom of trauma they're experiencing at home. Not always, but it may stem from that. Or it may stem from some other form of trauma that is happening to them that may be outside of the home, or ableism. So it's important you refer back to these 6 principles of trauma-informed care if you are working with clients with trauma. So next, we're going to go briefly into why it's important to know ableism, starting with eugenics. So eugenics is a belief that some people should have children while others should not. These determinants are based on good genes, but highly biased, favoring one group over another. So these good genes under eugenics are obviously white, able-bodied, straight, and higher income. Those were the good genes that individuals wanted under eugenics. And then historically, that has led to the forced sterilization of individuals with disabilities. So 31 states plus Washington, D.C. Allow forced sterilization currently. Only 2 states have banned forced sterilization, and then 17 states and 3 territories have some ambiguous laws about forced sterilization. Okay. So in states where it's not legal, caregivers can use long-acting reversible contraceptives, also known as LARCs, to sterilize them. So although forced sterilization may be illegal, caregivers can still go in and be like, hey, I want my self-advocate or my child to be on these contraceptives because I don't want them to get pregnant. I don't want them to engage in sex, et cetera, et cetera. And in this sense, it sterilizes them. So people with disabilities are often more likely to have their children taken away from them as well. And then 1 in 10 children are at risk of being removed from their home simply because their parent has a disability. So it goes beyond just sterilization. So even if they don't go undergo sterilization. Maybe they're not even on contraceptions. Even when they have this child, they still are at risk of losing that child just because they have a disability. So this picture here is a map from 1935 of the eugenics and which laws have passed, which laws have been in effect, and which laws are pending. So you see, majority of the country have some form of sterilization laws. And this is a map from 2021, and you see not much has changed. We still have some ambiguity, but again, only 2 states have actually banned forced sterilization. So how ableism shows up in reproductive health care, now we're applying it to different settings. So doctors may assume their patients do not have disabilities when they do. Doctors may assume patients with certain disabilities are asexual or aromantic, so they may not screen for sexually transmitted infections. They may assume that individuals can't give consent, so therefore they assume that having sex is even off the table. There is lower rates of cervical cancer screenings within this population, and may be unsupportive if a patient with disability wants children. And lastly, may prioritize support person's opinion over the patient. So, the patient may bring up concerns, but they'll be like, yeah, whatever, we're going to talk to your caregiver. So how ableism shows up in sex therapy, we can assume a client, or individuals can assume a client is asexual or aromantic, assumes clients lacks the ability to give consent, refusing to answer the client's questions about sexuality, such as changing the topic, suggesting the client speaks with their support person first, dismissing, minimizing, or disbelieving patient experience around sexuality, or speaking with a client support person instead of the client about client concerns about sexuality. So just going out above the client, going over them, and not taking the client seriously. And lastly, how does it show up in sex education? One, not offering the same quality of sex education, either by removing the students with disabilities from sex education, or teaching certain topics and not comprehensive sex education. So, for instance, only teaching how to say no, and that's it. Praising peers without disabilities when the student wants to date someone with a disability. That's also how ableism shows up. And then only offering sex ed as a response to problematic behavior. So for instance, maybe someone with a disability is engaging in public masturbation or nudity. Then you want to do it as an intervention or a problematic measure. So that's also a way ableism shows up. You should be giving sex education throughout one's lifetime within age-appropriate information. And then lastly, teaching based on perceived cognitibility rather than biological age. Cool. Now we'll be passing it on to Allie on bias and how we understand it.
Thank you so much, Raven. I will take the virtual spirit wand. Take it over. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Raven just covered what is ableism, how does trauma result from ableism. They covered intersectionality and how this shows up in so many diverse ways. So I'm going to jump into bias. And what is bias? Bias is the inclination or prejudice for or against one person, a group, or an object. In short, bias is one way that our brain is wired to understand and process the world in an efficient way. However, this bias can lead to experiences of prejudice or maltreatment towards a person or a group of people. There are different kinds of bias. We have explicit bias, and this is the bias that we are actively and consciously aware of. We know we have this bias. Implicit bias, the bias that we are not actively and not consciously aware of. And the important bias that is relevant to our talk today, which is ableism. So let's talk about countertransference. Countertransference occurs when a therapist's own feelings and emotions begin influencing their reactions to a client. It can manifest in 4 different ways, but it's important to note that these 4 different ways have their own subcategories, such as parenting or protective countertransference, which stems from a need to take care of the client. Okay, so these 4 ways of countertransference is subjective, or the therapist's own unresolved issues can be the cause of the countertransference. Objective, the therapist's reaction to the client's maladaptive behavior could be the cause. Positive, therapist is overprotective and trying too hard to befriend the client. Or negative, therapists may act out against uncomfortable feelings in a negative way, such as being overly critical, punishing, or rejecting the client. Previous research has found that therapists often swing from negative to positive countertransference. One example from a study that looked at art therapists, their experience when working with clients with intellectual disabilities found that these therapists went from helplessness and sadness when working with their clients and swung all the way to protectiveness and joy, kind of on the opposite side. So they're swinging from one extreme to the next. Now let's look at understanding bias within the clients themselves, or bias within self-advocates, which is otherwise known as internalized ableism. So when anyone, hears a negative message repeatedly, like, you're not capable of dating, or you're not able to understand sex education, they may start to believe that it's true. And this is the case with internalized ableism. They could believe that people may not find them attractive or may not want to date them. Self-advocates may believe that their needs are not as important in a relationship. They may experience diminished autonomy and not know that they can say no. And this can lead to them policing or controlling others' behaviors, even within their own disability community. And this is seen in this comic strip that's on the slide in front of you. We see a self-advocate is stimming, their hand flapping, and then another self-advocate comes up and says, "Stop that ridiculous behavior. You should be ashamed." And the first person who was stimming says, "What's your problem? You're autistic too. So why are you upset that I'm stimming?" But if we take a look many years ago, the self-advocate in the yellow shirt was stimming, and somebody told them, "Stop that ridiculous behavior. You should be ashamed." So then from hearing this message over and over, they've internalized this belief that stimming's not okay, and they've now started policing others within their own community to stop the stimming behavior. Okay, so how do we manage these biases? There are several ways to manage biases, such as becoming aware, forming positive identity, and finding education. The first way is becoming aware. Bias ranges from conscious bias that you're aware of to unconscious bias that you're not aware of. Most people have unconscious bias, and sometimes that's not always a bad thing. For instance, you may hold an unconscious bias over the type of bread that you want for your sandwich. However, when it starts to occur with individuals or groups of people, then it becomes problematic. And there are ways to become more aware of this. One of the best ways to challenge these unconscious biases is to become self-aware. And you can do this by challenging your own current thoughts and behaviors. Think about your actions, thoughts, and emotions and how it impacts others around you. Additionally, start making less assumptions and thinking more critically if something is based on an assumption or if it's actually factual. And then also education, like taking classes that allow you to become more aware and learn more about the community and then apply it, which we're all doing here today together. Lastly, joining the community. Another way to apply what you've learned is to actively engage with and join the community that you may hold the bias for. Participate in events of celebration, of mourning, and our favorite, in action. Next is forming a positive identity to help manage your biases. Connecting with a disability advocacy community to learn more about disability culture and history can lead to a positive identity. Getting involved with advocacy and community-based organizations that support a positive identity around disability and sexuality, and joining support groups to share experiences and connect with others who are similar or learn from those who are different. And that's why it's so important that not only are we active in these communities, but self-advocates are active within their own communities as well. And then lastly, education and managing biases. Find spaces to hear and learn about the experience of others. Hearing and learning from others with disabilities and their journeys around healing from and understanding internalized ableism. Education provides an opportunity to address misconceptions and to learn. Education can normalize things that have been historically stigmatized, such as disability and sexuality. And my favorite part of education personally is the action of unlearning and making space for new values and new outlooks. All right, I love this image. Thank you, Jacqueline. I see you love it too. Let's move into our last bit of this presentation. We're going to talk about disability and sexuality. So we're going to start with facts versus myths. Our first myth is that self-advocates have no interest in being sexual or having romantic relationships. This is just not true. The facts are that self-advocates have the same sexual desires and gender expression as those who do not have a disability. The next myth, teaching self-advocates sex education will lead to more inappropriate behavior. Raise your hand if you've heard this one. The fact, teaching self-advocates decreases the rates of inappropriate behavior and aids in better decision-making while increasing relationship and social skills. So there can be ableism within dating in the disability community. Many people with disabilities have expressed various concerns around dating that often has roots in ableism. For example, many spaces are not built for individuals with disabilities in mind. Some individuals have reported not being able to go to a bar or a club due to these spaces being inaccessible. Maybe there's not an accessibility ramp for a wheelchair user, or the environment is just overstimulating and there's not a quiet place to kind of take breaks. Some self-advocates report feeling the need to accommodate others, or they feel unworthy being in public spaces due to the added labor that their presence creates for the public, which might result in people with disabilities feeling like they're a burden and they just don't belong. Ability and disability are diverse and can be experienced differently by different people. It's dynamic and it can change day to day. Therefore, there may be a mismatch in expectations among individuals with disabilities, even within their own community. These expectations can vary from how much support someone needs to the assumption that individuals should mask or conceal their true selves to match societal expectations. And we're going to talk about a scenario around that on the next slide. Okay, so we've got Todd and Mary. Todd and Mary are self-advocates, and they're on their first date at a local coffee shop. Mary wears headphones throughout the date to help dampen the noise and reduce the chances of being overstimulated in this bustling cafe. Todd has been to this cafe many times, and he doesn't need to wear his headphones. He feels kind of embarrassed by Mary's continual use of her supports, and he asks if she can take them off, not understanding that she needs them because he can handle being in this cafe just fine. And this is an example of internalized ableism from Todd towards Mary. We can also look at the systemic nature that ableism plays in the sexuality of self-advocates. So many people with disabilities have negative experiences within school sex education. They find it unhelpful, harmful, and it includes little to no discussion about sexuality for self-advocates. Many people feel that they do not deserve their own sexual well-being due to internalized ableism and shame. And this is chronic, and it has roots in societal norms and expectations. The lack of proper sex education and guidance puts the undue burden on the individual with disabilities to find their own information and to enact their own education in unlearning and relearning the biases that they may hold themselves. So because of the systemic ableism within sexuality education and the rising reports of abuse in the disability community, we believe that sex education is the biggest first step towards breaking down biases and allowing self-determination for self-advocates. Individuals with disabilities have higher vulnerabilities to abuse, particularly due to the lack of education. Women with developmental disabilities experience higher rates of sexual assault, 68 to 83%, than those without disabilities. And children with disabilities are almost 3.5 to 4 times more likely to be sexually abused than children without disabilities. Sex education decreases the rates of abuse by teaching necessary skills to mitigate such abuse. It's important to remember that sex education is not only about sex. Comprehensive sex education goes beyond sexual behaviors, and it can be a potential avenue to decrease internalized ableism and increase knowledge and connection within the self-advocate's own community. Within comprehensive sex education, many topics are taught that include, but not limited to, anatomy, healthy platonic and romantic relationships, communication and consent, proper hygiene, development of positive identity, rights and self-agency, and online and in-person safety. Providing all of this information, we can not only benefit the sexual knowledge and skills of self-advocates, but we can also bolster and uphold their own self-determination and decreased rates of internalized ableism. So this is my plug for Tetons, because that's what we do. That's what we do at Tetons. We teach sex education, comprehensive sex education to teens and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We value healthy, safe, and legal behaviors and relationships. What we teach, like I said, is comprehensive. So we cover not only anatomy and contraception and safer sex practices, but also friendships and internet safety, recognizing abuse, how to report abuse. This is all around self-determined sexual wellness. So the agency is back on the self-advocates to make better decisions for themselves and to allow them dignity and risk. We take a neurodiversity affirming approach. All of our classes are the most accessible. And education for caregivers and professionals is also something we offer. So we offer separate classes for guardians to take on how to talk to their kids about sexuality. And when I say kids, I mean their whole lifespan. Because like Raven said, sex education, you don't just take it one time and it's done. It's a continuous conversation, and guardians have the unique space to continuously be talking about values and safety with their self-advocates. We also teach professionals classes where you can come and learn about the intersectionality of disability and sexuality, how to help decrease unsafe sexual behaviors. And then we also do lots of kind of unwrapping of your own personal biases in both the caregivers and professional classes. Okay, on this next slide, you guys can take a picture of it. This is our waitlist flyer. This is the best way to stay up to date with what Tetons is offering. You as a professional can sign up for this waitlist. Guardians can sign up, self-advocates can sign up, and we reach out to you whenever we have a new class coming up and when registration's open. So take a picture of this. I'll pause for a minute. If you ever have questions, if you ever have a case study that you don't know what to do with, or you're looking for very specific resources, you can always reach out to the Tetons team at tetons@utahparentcenter.org, and we will get back to you. we get this all the time, just people asking very specific questions or needing very specific resources. So we are so happy to have conversations. And then in the next couple months, we'll be launching a Tetons website. And that will be a wonderful tool for self-advocates, guardians, and professionals to use for refreshers and education. For the whole community. And let's see. The next page is just references. So if you're curious about where our information came from today or any of the studies that we referenced to, this is for you. And that's it. So Mindy, I do think we have time for questions.
Yes, thank you guys so much. You used your time very wisely. So we do have some time. Anybody have some questions for these guys? It could be about, ableism and sexuality. It could be about Tetons. It could be whatever. Anybody have any questions for them?
I see, Greg, your comment in the comment section that language is critical too. Using positive and forward expressing language is very important. Yeah, absolutely. And there's an education piece that comes to using language because language is always changing and evolving. So I think this was really a great call out. So thanks for adding that, Greg.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comments that you made about the need to improve sex ed as well. And this is just a personal comment, but my daughter has cerebral palsy and a left hemiparesis. And when she was in high school, I actually made a decision to withdraw her from the classes in our high school program because the curriculum did not fairly represent people with disabilities. And I felt that it would be very uncomfortable for her to have to go through that curriculum. It was, I think, a challenge for us to find a place where she could receive training where she was supported and could receive better information that was not biased. I really am impressed with the presentation here, and she did listen to the first part of the training and had to leave for an appointment. But I just wanted to say that I was just really impressed with this, and I'm hoping that she can listen to the rest of the training. Yeah, so that's my comment. The one other thing that I was going to mention is that she's working on a project right now that UDDC actually has a grant for her to be a part of. But Dan Habib is a production or producer for some stuff, and they're talking about relationships in the disability community, and she's actually kind of focused on that as a subject area for herself. So this is something that she's exploring, and it really is a great topic, and it deserves a lot more attention. So I truly hope that this is a program that moves forward and has more focus. Thank you for presenting.
Yeah, no, thank you, Greg. I'm glad she got to hear a little tidbit of it. I appreciate that. If you want to give her our email address, tetons@utahparentcenter.org.
Yep.
We're always looking for speakers or volunteers to come hang out. So if she's interested in just being a part of the program in some capacity, I'd love to get connected with her.
We're very familiar with Utah Parent Center. I know she'd love to come and hang out. We can go and talk to you guys anytime. That'd be great.
Great. Yeah. Please email me. I'd love that. Thanks, Greg.
Awesome.
Yeah. Ashley, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you guys also. This was incredible. As someone who loves comprehensive sex ed and wants to do that full time and get into sex ed policy hopefully one day, this was an incredible presentation to sit through. So thank you so much. On that topic though, I had a question, and maybe you guys touched on this, so I'm sorry if I missed it. What does implementation kind of look like? Like, do parents reach out to you? Do schools reach out to you? Are you pitching it and going into schools? Kind of what does that look like, and how has that been for you guys so far?
Yeah, for the Tetons program. So Utah Parent Center is kind of like the big overarching nonprofit, and Tetons is a project underneath Utah Parent Center. So we're totally grant funded by a handful of different grants. how we teach now, we teach in-person classes for teens and adults throughout the year. We usually do like three cohorts throughout the year, and that's in Murray. And we'll do a virtual cohort over the winter time. And then the Guardians courses are always virtual. We teach them like quarterly, so every 3-ish months. The professionals classes we teach quarterly as well. I think the next one's coming up in September. We don't go into schools because it's too difficult, to be quite honest. We teach comprehensive sex education, and that won't ever change. So we have had to shift some of our language due to some of our grants coming from the state. So going into schools, unfortunately, we've tried, and I am familiar with the state sex ed program. I would say the largest difference between kind of us and them is representation, obviously, from the disability community. Our curriculum is accessible to someone with an intellectual disability, so it's comprehensive for them. And also we focus so much on consent. Consent. Every time we just talk about consent kind of over and over. So that's kind of how we implement it. We do talks, we go to conferences, and then we're always a tool and a resource. So if you're interested in having us come out to you, if anyone here has like a group home that you want to train direct support providers, or you want us to come directly to you to talk to the self-advocates at your day center, we can also figure that out too. So please email us. We're open to collaborating and finding what fits your audience and our curriculum.
No, thank you that's wonderful. It's really nice to know that you guys, regardless of it sounds like demand or like people don't have to reach out to you. Like I know that you guys consistently host these and then people can find you guys and sign up for them. That's what I was curious about. So thank you. And yes, I hear you on the barriers with comprehensive sex ed in this state and others. So thank you guys for everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Katie, I see your hand popped up too.
It's kind of a follow-up to that. Do you guys primarily provide services to folks within Utah, or do you offer those outside of Utah?
So we have had people outside of Utah on our virtual classes. The rule of thumb is we're funded by state dollars in Utah. So we're always going to allow a Utah resident first before extending nationwide. But there's usually always space in a virtual class to accept people from outside. And then professionals and guardians also are always welcome, but we do only advertise within the state. But if you have larger network that you want to share stuff with, please do. I know we kind of schmooze in the sex education community nationwide, and there's just not a lot in the like intellectual developmental disability space. So I know that there's not a lot out there.
I've seen you at the AUCD Sexual Health SIG before. Your name looks super familiar. But if not, I can give you that info. And anytime you want to send stuff out to the whole network, you can send it to me or send it to the group. So
yeah, if you would email me, that would be super lovely. I would love that. Yeah. But yeah, I guess that's kind of it. That's what we do. We have classes coming up in July that for teens, I believe teens start July 1st and adults are July 2nd. And those will run weekly, July through August. So if you have a client in mind that would like to get on board with the Tetons, you can email us and I'll send you the registration. I'm just reading this comment that popped up from Caitlin. One of the biases is that people think that those with disabilities that need a higher level of care cannot take care of their own children if they get pregnant. I'm wondering what your response is to those kinds of ideas, or what would that practically look like if a person with severe disabilities got pregnant? What is the general attitude in response to that? Does the caregiver then step in to take care of them both, or does it vary depending on the state laws? That's a huge question. And I think that warrants a really in-depth conversation, to be quite honest. We believe very strongly in choice and autonomy at the root of everything. And I understand that when there's guardianship involved, there's different laws, and depending on the type of guardianship that's there, that can change. Guardianship is its own, I guess, kind of beast, because that's agreed upon on a legal sense between a judge and the family. So it would just be so individualized depending on the person. But I think if, as a blanket statement, we believe in agency and self-determination and dignity and risk. So I guess that would be like my blanket answer to that. And then Natalie asked if this is offered virtually in Spanish. Not currently, but I would love it. We are getting our curriculum currently, what's the word? Translated into Spanish. So, and then how we will offer that after the translation is done, I'm not sure, but it'll probably be through our website. So Natalie, that wait list that was up earlier, I can also drop it here in the chat. If you signed up for that wait list, as things came out in Spanish, you would also be notified. So if that's something you're interested in, I would sign up for the wait list, and I'll put it here in the chat for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for the questions, for the responses, you guys. I feel like we have learned so much from you guys. So thank you so much for that presentation. Any other last questions before we jump into our breakout groups? Okay. Well, in that case, I am going to post some community questions in the chat here. And then I'm going to figure out breakout groups. So give me just a minute. But I will put those in, and you can be taking a look at those questions, and then we'll be split into, I think, just 2 different groups right now. I know a lot of people are leaving. Please don't leave. We love to have you stay and chat with us. Also, if you do have to run, I know some people really do. There is a link that I posted a little ways back in the chat of a survey, and I'll send it out after the fact as well. But if you could please fill out that survey for us, let us know your experience today. We need feedback, so please take some time to do that. But okay, here I am going to post our questions in the chat so you can start taking a look at those. Sorry, the numbers are weird. I don't know why that did that, but okay. And then you'll be in a group in just a minute, and we'll start chatting.
Mindy, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Welcome back. That's what I was saying. Welcome back. I think we've got everyone back in. So thank you so much. We're so close to out of time, but I would love to give each just some time for a representative from each of those groups share a little bit of what you discussed. I don't know if Ali, do you want to go first, or if I don't know if you took notes.
Yeah, I did. I took notes. We didn't get through all the questions because we had just great conversation.
Same.
Do you want me to just address all of them, or just number 1?
Just what you got through. Just
Okay.
kind of quickly. We mostly just talked about question 1 in our group. So.
Oh, okay. All right. So the first question: how have we seen ableism firsthand between individuals or in the media? So we talked about the developmental disability community not receiving the same treatment from kind of reframing disability for other disability groups. And they're just still infantilized across the board. And that hasn't really been addressed by like larger society. Also seeing the IDD community police each other and presume lack of ability, especially between people who are non-speaking and speaking. And that kind of creates a huge divide. Also within the IDD community, people still using the R word or calling people special ed or calling people names kind of along those terms because they presume a difference in ability level between their peers. the differences between hidden disability and visible disability, creating kind of a separation. And then just this all stems from internalized ableism. How have we seen ableism show up in our field of work? We've seen the removal of AAC devices. They communicate enough. They don't need this AAC device. Or just not seeing AAC as an okay way of communication, and not believing in it, I guess. Having a self-advocate be seen as too pretty to have IDD, or not like them enough. And then another one that was brought up that was really eye-opening for myself was lack of opportunity for grants for the IDD community specifically, which creates just kind of systemic issues down the road. All right. The most difficult thing about discussing ableism and sexuality. This was kind of anecdotal. From one of our participants, says that they had a client with mild ID, and this client had a girlfriend, but that they have a really hard time seeing each other, hard time getting together, and that this client's mom and sister just aren't willing to help support this relationship and kind of see it as a problem or see it as a barrier. And then we talked about religion and families' values not allowing or kind of creating the ableism. For instance, a religious family not allowing masturbating or access to sexual behavior. And that intersection of religion, religion and values and ableism creates this really complex situation in addressing sexuality. And being in Utah, we are not unfamiliar with that.
Yep.
As far as strategies or resources that we use to speak with different groups about ableism and sexuality, we really only got through parents and caregivers. We use resources and education as a huge way to talk to parents and caregivers, because like we said earlier, education just kind of makes the biggest difference. Talking parents kind of off a ledge, just calming the parents' stress, that what they're seeing really isn't that big of a deal. That maybe the behavior they're seeing in their child with ID or developmental disability is actually typical for the age of that person. So any 25-year-old male is probably masturbating regardless of their disability status. Having abuse prevention conversations with parents and caregivers, using storytelling as a tool. And then remembering that culture plays a very large role in advancing these ideas around unsafe sexual behaviors. So that was from us.
You guys covered a lot more ground than we did. Way to go.
We did a great job.
You guys did awesome. We focused a lot on that first question. I wonder if Gabrielle, would you mind sharing what we kind of talked about?
Yeah, I will do my best to summarize it.
Great.
Like you said, we just focused on the first question. So, talking about ways that we're seeing ableism firsthand between individuals or in the media. And we talked a little bit about how within relationships, there's some struggles that we're seeing because of some internalized ableism, so not wanting to be perceived as a person with disabilities or not wanting to make relationships with people with disabilities, talking about how relationships are hard in general, and then you add that added layer of ableism to it, and it can make it really hard to find healthy relationships. There's different expectations placed on people with disabilities, or those disabilities are taken advantage of. We talked about how there's poor representation in the media, and that oftentimes the representation that we're seeing is of males, and with that, it comes with their own stereotypes. Greg, I think it was, that brought up a great point about the conversation of you can't be an accomplished woman, and that intersectionality of identity within disability. And so we talked about that. We talked about disability often being used as a place of inspiration, or like a things could be worse kind of situation. We talked about how a lot of the steps that we're seeing or progress that we're seeing in our fields is definitely like a slow glacial pace. And it's hard to like see those changes because it's happening so slowly, but it's like important to acknowledge that baby steps are being made. Some of the things that we're seeing are people with disabilities being included in the community and that being a new age concept. And that people, sorry, I'm trying to read what this statement I wrote down was. That change of blame of these people can't do things versus is it society's fault for not teaching people about it? And then also the poor representation in the field that it's so often females are doing the work rather than males due to like some sexism. Yeah, that's kind of the big stuff that I have written down.
Yeah, that's great. We we really did go down a rabbit hole. Katie, thanks for that. But it was what a great discussion. Thank you all so much for your input, for being willing to share, for sticking around for the discussion portion. I know we lost a lot of people right before we started that, so I'm really glad that everybody that's here stuck around. We love to hear from each other and learn from each other. So thank you so much. If you have a minute before you hop off, I did post that survey link again. And I will send that again in an email as well. We really want to hear from you and hear about your experience and any feedback you have on how we can make this better. I see Allie's dropping also some links in the chat about Tetons. Thank you again so much for that presentation, you guys, today. That was so wonderful. And I've really enjoyed hearing from everyone on the call. Thank you so much. Come back next month. We'll be here again. Thank you.